Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Fractured Vows. Blurb. Stop calling me that, little mate, he says. I push him slightly, forcing him out of my doorway. Leaning closer, my eyes lock onto his. What should I call you then? I ask, my hand still pressed firmly against his chest. I can feel his heartbeat quicken. My gaze flickers to his lips and back to his eyes. He licks his lips and steps closer. Call me mate, he replies. I shake my head, meeting his stare. I guess it will have to be your name, I say. After years of being sent away from her home and everything familiar, she returns, only to face the one who broke her heart. Once, he was her protector, her closest ally, and the one who made the hardest decision sending her away for reasons she was too young to understand. Now he's eager to rekindle what they once had. But when she learns the truth, will she forgive the one who hurt her most? Episode 1. Chapter 1. Lena. I couldn't help but stare out of the taxi window as we approached my home. I have been away from my pack, the Midnight Eclipse pack, for nearly 6 years. I was sent away by the Alpha's son. I was supposed to come home after a year, but I didn't want to return. I didn't want to see who hurt my feelings. For the last few years, I have stayed in my uncle's pack, the Emberwood pack. It was an eye-opening experience. The training was intense, but I excelled at the top of the class. The Alpha had every member train at the age of 14, which in the Midnight Eclipse pack, you couldn't start training till the age of 16. The forest comes into view, pulling me out of my thoughts, and the taxi takes the turn towards the pack. I could sense wolves in the forest. I couldn't help but sigh. This is going to be complicated. The Alpha's son Eli. His full name is Elias Morgan, but everyone calls him Eli. I never have. I always call him Elias, as I know it pisses him off. He's my brother's best friend. They are 6 years older than me, making them the right age to find their mates. Speaking of mates, I thought my mate would be in my uncle's pack, but he wasn't there. The age of finding our mates is 19. I could find mine now, as I've just turned 20, but I haven't. I have to admit, everyone wants their mate to be a virgin, but I didn't wait. I knew whoever I ended up with had probably been with other people, and I don't like the stereotypes where they have to wait for their soulmate, especially women. What if I didn't find my mate till I was 29? I would be the oldest virgin known to man, especially in the werewolf community. I would be the laughing stock of the whole pack. The main reason for coming back home to my pack was because my brother had found his mate. Logan, who thought girls were boring at the age of 10 because they were too slow at running. But it all changed when he hit 13, and he had his first girlfriend, who happened to be the worst. She picked on me like there was no tomorrow. She was evil. When I left, I was happy to learn that they had broken up and his mate was not hers. His mate is Sophia, but I don't know anything about her as she's not from this pack. My father likes her, but I think he would say that even if he didn't, just to get Logan out of his house. It has been the 3 of us, as my mum passed away when I was 10. My uncle, my father's brother, comes to stay once a month to check on us. My father was heartbroken when she died. I never wanted to suffer like that, and watching my father go through the pain of losing his mate always made me second-guess whether I ever wanted mine. When I was forced to leave, my uncle was there. I wasn't too thrilled to go, but I had no choice but to leave. I wanted to die right there and then. Elias never gave me a real reason except one that a 13-year-old would take seriously, but he also left me with an image of him that I would never forget. But he told me I was too young for him and that he could do a lot better than me. You might have guessed that at 13 I had a crush on him, well, more like years. He was hot back then, but I don't know what he looks like now, as I never added him to my social media accounts. But I feel he has been stalking me on there, as my brother has liked a few photos that a brother should never like. I wanted to forget about him. The pack house comes into view as the taxi goes around the corner. The taxi drives past it, but I can't help but look at the place. It hasn't changed since I left. It's like a hotel to most people, but most pack members who live there are members without homes. Many lost their homes due to rogue attacks or even just by weather alone. The taxi driver goes past, and a few seconds later my house comes into view. I can't help but smile. The house was the same as it was when I left. But it looks like my father has placed more flowers in the flower beds around the house. He made it for my mother before she died, and we used to water the flowers together. The taxi came to a halt outside. I opened the door and climbed out. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. I walked around the cab and grabbed my bag from the driver, who was waiting for me to pay him. It's been a while since I've last been here. I handed the driver the money. I didn't mind him, as he never talked to me, which I liked as I was nervous about coming back. But judging from the driver's face, I think he knew to leave me to my thoughts as he was a wolf from the pack. The driver climbs back into the taxi and drives away. I can't help but stand and stare. I never felt so nervous about being back home. "You okay there?" says Bex, my wolf, smirking. I groaned, "Yeah, just trying to figure out whether this is a good idea or not," I said to her. Bex looks at me and sighs, "We needed to come back, we trained hard, and not only that, we might find our mate." Bex has been on about our mate for the last year, but I'm still not keen on the whole thing. "You never know, we might have to," she says, smirking. "Why did I have to have the horniest wolf known to man?" Bex laughs, "I like men and women too." I smirk, remembering the last encounter we had. As I said, I'm no virgin by any means, but I do like to have fun when I want to. I have kissed a girl, and as Katy Perry stated, she liked it. I can tick it off my bucket list, and I must admit that I liked it too, but I prefer men. Bex looks through my eyes at the house. "Nothing has changed," she says. I sighed, "Well, let's get this over with," I said to her. Bex nods and goes back slightly but stays close enough. I walked to the front door and knocked on it. I waited for a few moments until the door opened. There stood my father with a big smile on his face. "Lena," he shouted as he pulled me into a hug. I can't help but drop my bag on the floor and wrap my both arms around him. I can't help but inhale his scent, pine trees. I missed it so much. I can feel Bex purr in my head as the scent overtakes us. My father moves back slowly and smiles. "I thought you were coming later on," he says as he bends down and grabs my bag. "I have planned a family meal for all of us." My father walks in, but I can't help the groan that slips past my lips. My father looks over his shoulder at me with raised eyebrows. "Lena, we haven't seen you in 6 years, he says as he turns around to face me. He places my bag on the couch. "I know we FaceTime and email all the time, but that's nothing like seeing you in the flesh, and besides, Logan wants to see you." I stare back and sigh, "I know, but I have not long come in, and I just want a hot shower first," I say, "maybe a little sleep." Have you ever been on 3 different types of transport? 2 of them had a screaming baby and 1 annoying passenger who had a problem with everything. The human was lucky Bex was sleeping, or I would have let her come out to play. My father smirks. I would have liked to see Bex take charge, he says. Most werewolves get their werewolves at 12, but I had mine at 10. I was there when my mother was killed, which brought on my first shift. My dad was nearby, but Bex protected Mum's dead body when he came to save us. I didn't turn back into my human form for 3 days as I struggled with it all, but my dad got to know Bex. My father made Logan stay with Elias and his father as he made out that I was upset and didn't want to see anyone. No one in the pack knew I had my wolf, only my father and me. I never understood why he kept it a secret till one boy shifted early and Alpha Frank made him train. He was a year older than me, and he witnessed death too. My father must have thought I would have been made to prepare early, but when we announced that I had my wolf, the law changed for girls to start training when they were 16 and boys at 14, which angered me, as we are all the same and I have to admit, women can kick more s than men anyway. My father cleared his throat. Where did you go? He asked as I shook my head, pulling away from my thoughts. Nowhere, I smiled. It's only the 4 of us. No one else for the meal. My father looks at me and nods. It's only the 4 of us, no one else is coming here. Everyone is away on business. They will be coming back tomorrow, he says. I stared at him, and I knew that he was lying, and he was doing it now. Who did he invite? I sighed and ignored the feeling I had. I'm going to my room, I said as I walked over to the couch and grabbed my bag. My father watches me. Food will be ready in about 3 hours, and you get to meet Sophia, he says with a smile. I looked at him and nodded. I didn't say anything as I knew I hadn't had the energy to talk more. This evening will be challenging, and not knowing who else was coming was worrying me slightly. I placed my bag on my shoulder and headed to the stairs. I walked towards my bedroom door, and opened it. I stood in the doorway, looking at the room. My father hadn't changed anything, it still had purple on the walls. The posters I was into when I left, and judging by the smell here, my window hasn't been opened in a few weeks as it smells stale. I dropped my bag on the floor and headed over to the window to open it. I opened the window, and a fresh gust of air came into my room. I sighed. I looked around, wondering what I was going to do, but I had a thought. Maybe I should sort some things around here first, make it more me. I might as well, and I have 3 hours to kill. Also, it will keep my mind busy from overthinking the meal that my father has planned for the evening. Chapter 2. Eli, she's finally coming home today. Tim had confirmation that she would be there, and I was happy. I said to myself as I stared out of the office window. I need to know she's here. Calm down, says Blaze, my wolf, with a smirk on his face. Good things come to those who wait. I groaned. You have been saying that for the last 6 frigging years to me, I said to him. Blaze laughs. I know, and you still get your pants in a twist. I looked out the window, but there was no taxi or anything. I need to keep myself busy. I walk away and head out of the office, and I walk straight to the gaming room to find James and Sophia going hot and heavy. I groaned out as I walked in on them. For sake, go to your room and do that, I yelled as I turned around to avoid looking at them. Logan laughs, but I knew Sophia would be bright red. She gets easily embarrassed as she's shy, but she knows how to have fun. You can look now, Logan said as I turned around to find Sophia was still flushed. I couldn't help but smirk. Logan is my beta, which makes Sophia my beta female. Since we were 3, I have been friends with Logan, and our fathers are friends too. Logan smirks. It won't be long, and you get to see your mate, he says as he sits on the couch, pulling Sophia closer. I smiled. Yeah, and you get your sister back too, I said as I walked further into the room and took the chair opposite them. I can't wait to meet her, says Sophia. When was the last time you saw her? I don't say anything, as the last time I saw her was when she left 6 years ago. Logan's sister is my mate, Lena. I found out she was my mate when I turned 20, but she was only 13 at the time. It's against the law to tell your mate that you are mates if they are younger than you, so I had to wait. I would have found out a year earlier, but my father had me stay in Alpha School for another year to get further training. When I found out she was my mate, I found it hard not to tell her. It was affecting me too much, having her around and breathing in her scent made Blaze horny, and he wanted her constantly. Logan and I were players back then, so you would find us with women all the time. He had enough of Lena one evening and snooped in her room to find her diary. Logan was thrilled to tell me that his sister had a crush on me, but when you hear your friend tell you that his little sister had a crush on you, I told him that she was my mate. He was shocked but took it well after needing a few breathing moments. After a long chat, we told our fathers what was going on. Tim's brother, Keith, was staying with us as he was on his monthly visit to see his brother. He also found out that evening and mentioned that she could go to school in his pack. The mate bond towards her was too strong for me to handle, as everyone noticed I had to control Blaze every time she was around. We came up with sending her to school in Keith's pack. When they told her, Lena wasn't having any of it, which led to me doing the most challenging thing ever. I had to find a way for her to leave. And I found it in the worst possible way, and I knew I hurt her a lot. She left without saying anything to me after that evening. I felt like a jerk, but she was a child. I had to deal with her being away from me and becoming the best alpha I could be. I knew I had to prepare for her return as I wanted to make sure she knew she was mine. I was pulled from my thoughts as I could hear Logan talk. None of us have seen her for 6 years, says Logan. I glanced over at him, and he had a sad expression. We talk and text, even FaceTime, but it's not the same as seeing her face to face. Sophia nods, but she looks between us. Well, I can't wait, she says, I get to have a sister now. Sophia came to us from another pack, but she had no family, as they all perished in a fire a few years ago. She was an only child too. We both smiled at her. I sighed. I bet looking at her social media accounts haven't helped, Sophia says. I could feel Blaze look at me, but we both stayed quiet. Eli hasn't seen anything on social media, says Logan. Lena blocked him from everything. Sophia looked at me with raised eyebrows. Why? She asked. I'm still trying to figure that one out myself. Sophia looks at Logan. Jas, please tell me you have let him look at them, she asks him. Logan smirks at me, his eyes never leaving mine. Oh, I have, but she has now blocked me because the lovesick liked her photo in a bikini. I groaned. Sophia stares at me, and I hear Blaze laugh in my head. You never, she says. I couldn't help it. I thought she looked hot, and in all fairness, it was the first time I had ever seen her since she left here, I said, trying to defend myself. I have to admit, seeing her in the photo was a huge turn on. I even got it on my laptop as I saved the picture. My mouth fell open looking at it. She has changed since she left. When she was younger, she was skinny with blonde hair, and her blue eyes were slightly dull. She was small. But the photo I saw was of her in a bikini. She was tanned and still blonde, but she was toned in all the right places, she had curves too. Yeah, I know man, but did you have to like that one? Logan asks. I don't like all her photos, especially those she's in bikinis as she's my sister. I stared at him but smirked. Don't, Logan says. She knew it was you and even threatened to chop my nuts off. I can't help but laugh. I can't see that happening, I said to him. Logan looked at me for a moment, his face expressionless. He must have had a mind link come through. After a few moments, Logan comes back, but the corner of his mouth lifts into a smirk. Well, loverboy, she's here, he says. I stare at him. Blaze looks at him and moves to attention at the mention of the arrival of our mate. I go to move, but Logan stops me. Hold on there, he says. I glanced at him and frowned. But his face had a weird expression in place. Lena told Dad that she didn't want anything, but my father told me to tell you that she knows about the meal he has prepared, but she wants it to be the four of us. I couldn't help the snarl that escaped my lips. That wasn't happening. I have waited for 6 frigging years to see her. She was supposed to be back 2 years ago, but she never came. Hang on, says Logan. My father told her that the 4 of us will be there, but you and your father can come later once we have settled down to eat. I sat back down and frowned. I guess that's fair, I said to him. I think you should all wait, says Sophia, making us both look at her. Sophia stares at us. She will be overwhelmed with everything, and she has just come home from traveling. Also, she may need sleep, she says. Babe, my sister's not like that, says Logan. She will want to see us, and this guy was her crush back in the day. She will want to see him when she knows he's her mate. Sophia stared at him, unconvinced. I don't know, she says. Logan and Sophia looked at each other, but they had blank expressions. They must have carried on talking through the mind link. I got up and walked out. I needed to get away from them. They might have a lover's argument or something, and I had no intention of being a part of it. I walked through the pack house and headed to my room. I needed to be ready for later, and I was going to see my mate after waiting for 6 years. I just hoped to convince her why I had to let her go and that I have been waiting for her. Chapter 3. Lena. For the last few hours, my room was starting to take shape. I bagged everything that I didn't want anymore. It felt good to get rid of the old items, especially my clothes, but one thing is for sure, I need new clothes. My father kept checking on me, but in all fairness, I think he was making sure I was still in my room. I sighed as I placed the black sack in the corner of the room. I looked around. I knew I needed to redecorate with a splash of paint, but I could do that another time. But my room was slowly coming together. I moved my bag from the floor and placed it on the bed. I unpacked everything I had brought with me. I didn't have much, and I always traveled lightly, as I never knew if I wanted to stay in one place or not. My uncle's pack was the place I called home for the last 6 years, but I traveled around with members of the pack to help with situations and even visited some gorgeous locations. Bex stirs in my bed and looks through my eyes. You okay? She asks. I sigh. Yeah, I guess, I say as I grab a dress to wear for dinner my father has planned for this evening. You know we could go for a run, she says with a grin. I laughed slightly. I would love to, but we are having a family meal with Dad and Logan, I said. Besides, we get to meet Sophia. Bex nods. I hope she's nice, she says. I wouldn't want to pee someone's throat out. I stared back at her, seriously. Bex smirks. You should wear the navy dress, she says. I groaned. We talked about this, I said as I walked into the bathroom. I know, but I think you should look hot, she says. You never know, she might outdo you. I stopped in my tracks and pulled a face. Seriously, she's my brother's mate, I say as I switch on the shower. Bex laughs. You are so easy to wind up, she says, shaking her head. I groan and climb into the shower. I quickly get showered and wash my hair. Once I was finished, I climbed out and wrapped a towel around me. I walked back into my room and dried myself off. I dress in a navy dress, which makes Bex smirk. I ignore her. I sit in front of my mirror and dry my hair. I won't do much as it's only family. I applied some makeup, and I was ready. I got up from my chair and placed my flats on. I glanced up and noticed a figure in the doorway. Well, don't you look nice, says Logan, leaning on my door frame. I jumped up and smiled at him. Logan, I screamed and ran into his open arms as he pushed off the door frame. He picks me up and swings me around. Minnie, he says as he places his head into my neck. I wrapped my arms around his neck. I pull back and frown. I wish you would stop calling me that, I say to him as he puts me down. Logan smirks. It's not my fault you're short, he says. My father and brother are over 6 feet tall, but I seem to have been given the short gene of 5 feet 4. My mum was tall too, so God knows who I got my height from. Well, I might be short but I will hurt you, I smirked. Logan laughs. I like to see you try, Minnie, he says. I stared at him with a smirk. If only he knew what I could do. Bex smirks. Logan looks at me. Well, I want you to meet Sophia, he says with a soppy grin. I have never seen my brother look this happy in his life, except when he thought we got him tickets for his favorite football team, Chelsea. I smirked. Is it fair to say that my big brother is in love? I said to him. Logan looked at me, and his cheeks flushed slightly. Please tell me I made my brother get embarrassed. I didn't say anything. I wrapped my arms around him and we walked out of my room, straight down the stairs. Logan went down the stairs first, and I followed him. I couldn't help but glance around until my eyes landed on a slender girl standing next to my father. She looks up at me and smiles. You must be Lena, she says as I walk over to them. I smile. Sophia held her hand out to me, and I was happy to take it. I am, and you must be the one who has made an honest man out of my brother, I said to her. Sophia smiles, but I can tell she has a slight blush on her cheeks. I glanced at my brother, who seemed to be staring at his mate like a lovesick puppy. He wraps his arms around her waist. I smile. Bex stares through my eyes and looks at Sophia. He did good, she says. She sits on her back paws. So, how do you feel about being back home? Asks Sophia, who pulls me away from my wolf. I smile. It's okay but weird, I say as I move toward the couch. Sophia moves away from Logan and follows me. She sits down next to me, and she smiles. Nothing's changed since I left. Sophia smiles, but I glance at my father and Logan, who are huddled in the corner. Logan looks up at me. Dad and I will make sure the food is ready, he says as they both walk into the kitchen. Not weird at all, they are planning something. Never mind them, says Sophia. I glanced back at her and smiled. So, how did you meet my brother? I asked her. Logan told me in an email, but I would like to hear about it from her point of view, as sometimes men would exaggerate things, especially when it comes to women. Sophia smiled. I came here to visit the pack, as I wanted to find my mate. My alpha allowed some women to go to different packs to find their mates as most were getting older. So I was picked to go. I remember coming here, and they held a barbecue party for us. I saw him standing by the barbecue getting some food, she says. He looked up, and we were hooked. Not exactly what he said, but I guessed he would have been by the food since he loves eating so much. Sophia and I talked for a bit longer. I have to admit, I like her. She is good for Logan. Food's ready, called Logan as he came into the lounge. I look up at him and he smiles. Dad went all out on food, made all your favorites, he says. Well, I'm starving, says Sophia as she gets up from the couch. I smiled to myself and moved off the couch. I watch as Sophia places her hand into Logan's hand. I couldn't help but smile. I follow them into the kitchen, where my father stands behind the cooker, dishing out what looks like soup into bowls. He looks at me and smiles. Take a seat, Lena, he says, nodding towards the dining table. I nod and walk over to the table to take my usual space. I pulled out the chair and sat down. But I glance around at the table and realize that there are another 2 places set. I look at my father, but he avoids my gaze. Logan sits a seat down from me, making the space in front of me free. There were 2 seats at either end of the table, which was for my father, but no clue who the other one was for. Sophia was sitting next to me. I was about to say something, but the doorbell rang out. I get it, says my father and walks out of the kitchen. I glanced at Logan. Who's that? I asked him. Logan looks at me but smirks, but doesn't say anything. Moments later, my father walks back in with Alpha Frank following right behind him. I should have known, but before I could say anything, a scent hit my senses like a tidal wave and nearly knocked me off my chair. Bex starts to get restless in my head and stirs. Whoever it is, has my wolf going crazy. Mate, yells Bex in my head suddenly. He's here. She stares out of my eyes. Alpha Frank stands there and looks at me, but someone stands behind him, and his eyes land on me. My stomach does somersaults. I know those eyes anywhere. It had to be him. It had to be that arsehole. I keep my expression blank as I stare at him. A smirk appears on his mouth as his eyes never leave mine. Welcome home, mate, he says. Bex stares back, and her mouth has drool slipping out of the sides of her mouth as she looks at him. But she looks at me but moves her head to the side and stares at him. That's, she says but stops. I stare at her. But she didn't say anything to me. I'm waiting for her to register who he is. I look back at the man who hurt my feelings 6 years ago. He might look like ex god on legs, but this woman is not going to fall for him. I must have been silent for too long as someone cleared their throat. I saw Elias smirking and everyone was looking between both of us, trying not to ruin a moment or something. Well, hello Elias, it's been a while. I said in a calm voice. Chapter 4. I decided to head to the office to get some work done after being in my room. I walked back to the office and walked in. I noticed my father sitting at the desk, buried in paperwork. He looked up at me and smiled. There you are, he said. He moves out of the chair and walks around the desk, heading straight toward me. Have you heard that she's back? He asks. I nodded, but I walked past him to get to the desk. I could feel my father's eyes on me as I sat down and looked up at him. What's wrong? He asks with a frown as he takes the chair in front of me. Once he sits, he looks at me. I couldn't help but sigh. I know she's back, and I'm happy, I said to him. I just hope she accepts me. I hurt her feelings the last time I saw her. You had to let her go, he says. You would have been driven mad knowing you couldn't touch her or be with her. I knew that, I was so excited when I found out, but I realized that she was only 13. My world came crashing down around me. I had to wait 6 years to claim her, which never sat well for Blaze or me. Werewolf law states if a mate is older than their mate, they have to wait till they are at the right to consent. I was screwed. At first, it was okay, but then her scent was everywhere, which drove Blaze crazy. He wanted to be around her. I had to be locked in a cell a few times because my wolf wanted her. The mate bond was strong between us, and it was hard to control Blaze. My father stares at me. She will, he says. She might need some time, but she will want you. You just have to be honest and straightforward with her. I smiled, but I felt all kinds of emotions, but mainly my nerves were getting to me. Eli, she will accept you and become your Luna, he says. I looked up and stared at him. I hope so, I said. My father nods. Let's get the paperwork down, and by the time we finish, it will be time to head over to see Lena, he says. I nodded and got to work on the paperwork my father was working on before I came into the office. I'm the alpha of the Midnight Eclipse Pack, and I took over from my father about 4 years ago. My father has always shown me the ropes of running the pack throughout my life. When I took over, he helped me out whenever I needed him. My mum died when I was young, so I'm all he has. I'm hoping once Lena takes her place as my Luna, my father will start living more for himself. He deserves to be happy. Time flies when you are having fun, not. After a few hours, my father moved into his chair, and I could feel him looking at me. I glanced up and noticed that his face was blank. Someone was mind-linking him. My stomach started to go into knots. Maybe we can go and see her. Blaze stirs in my head and looks through my eyes. I glance at him and notice a smile. We are going to see mate, he says. I looked at my father, who was smiling. I guess Blaze told you we could leave now for the meal, he said. I can't help but smile. Truth be told, my stomach was all knotted up. I didn't know whether I was going to be sick or burst with excitement. Why do I feel so sick? I muttered to him. My father smirks. It's the thought of seeing your mate, he says. I remember feeling the same way when I saw your mother. She could take my breath away, and the ground would swallow me up. I smiled, but I could see the sadness forming on his face. He does this whenever he thinks about Mum. I wish the moon goddess would give him a second chance, mate. My father shakes his head, shaking his thoughts away, and looks at me. Let's go, we can finish this work tomorrow or another day, he says. I nodded and got up, moving from around the desk. My father gets to the door, and we both leave the office. We both walked through the pack house and left on foot as Lena's house wasn't that far away from the pack house. My father and I walk in silence, but I know he wants to tell me something. I look at him as he opens his mouth. I have to ask, he says and looks at me, when do you think you and Lena will announce her as your Luna? Dad, let's see what happens first, I said to him, trying not to sound overly confident. I want to say as soon as possible, but it all depends on what happens when we see each other. My father nods. I think so too. Tim mentioned that Lena only wanted her family there, he says and glances towards me. But he told me that we should come as you have been waiting long enough to see her. Thank you, Tim, I thought. We walked through the forest and come to their house. I remember staying over here a few times over the years with Logan. His father would let us get ready to go out or even have a few games of pool in the garage. The house has never been changed. Well, decorating-wise, it hasn't. Tim wanted to keep everything the way his mate left it as it reminded him of his mate and also Logan and Lena. They lost their mum 9 years ago. Logan took it hard, but Tim told us that Lena suffered more as she was close to her. Logan stayed with us more while Tim kept a closer eye on Lena. I knew how they felt, but I lost mine when I was 5. The house came into view. It looks small on the outside, but it is enormous inside. Tim kept adding to it. When Logan turned 15, he added a garage to the house, which he turned into a game and gym section for us boys to work out in. It was fantastic as we would all be there, working out. I never saw Lena there, but we were older than her. As we approach the door, my father walks in front of me and rings the doorbell, which can be heard around the house. After a few moments, the door opened and there stood Tim with a smile on his face. My father and Tim mutter a few words, but I'm hit with the most intoxicating scent that stirs Blaze and everything inside me as soon as I walk inside. I didn't move and stared towards the kitchen door. Blaze is close, and he wants to see her. He has been dying to see her as much as I have. "You okay there?" says Tim. I looked at my father and him, and they had stupid smirks on their faces. I can't speak, as I don't know whether I can get my words out or not. I nodded to them. Tim moves and walks first, opening the kitchen door with my father following him. I walked behind them both. Her scent is strong, and Blaze is going crazy in my head. He wants to see her, and he wants her. "Rein it in, dude," I said to him, "we don't want to scare her away." "I can't, human," he says with drool slipping from his mouth, "all I want to do is mount her and have her in every dirty position I can think of." Wolf, he needs to have his nuts chopped or something. Sensing my thoughts, he frowns. "Don't be an I*DT, he says, "we want pups, and I want to make her have as many as she will give us." I groan inwardly. My father walks through the kitchen door, and I walk behind him. My eyes scan the kitchen, but they instantly land on the most stunning creature known to man in front of me. As I looked at her, my mouth seemed to have gone all dry. I can't help but take in her beauty. She was not the scrawny little girl I remember. Her features are stunning with light makeup on, her hair now brown hair with a hint of red going through it. Her eyes were glued to me, and no one was saying anything. I couldn't help but smirk. "Welcome home, mate," I said. Her face never changed, but I could sense she was talking to her wolf. There was another pause, but she looked at me. "Hello Elias, it's been a while," she said with a slight smirk. She still calls me by my first name. I groan, but I look towards Logan, who has a stupid smirk on his face. "Well, why don't we all take our seats?" says Tim as he sits at the head of the table. My father heads to the other end while a seat faces my mate, so I sit in front of her. Her eyes follow my every move as I sit in front of her. As we all sit around the table, Tim gets up and places all the dishes on the table. Food was served, and we all dished out what we all wanted. I kept sneaking glances at Lena, but she kept her head down. Logan and my dad were making small talk. While Tim and Sophia were eating quietly, their eyes glanced between Lena and me. I continued to look at Lena while placing some meat into my mouth, but she never looked up from her plate. But I could feel the change in the air around her. "Stop looking at me," Lena says as she looks up from her plate. "Why don't you take a picture to remember me?" I smirk. Blaze smirks too. "Mate's feisty," he says. I like it. I have to admit, I like it too. She is making everything come alive inside me. I stared at her more, and her eyes never left mine. Without saying anything, she moves her chair back and gets up. She doesn't eat anything. She looks away from me and glances at everyone who has now gone quiet around the table. Her eyes landed on her father. Where is she going? I was about to move, but she turned her attention back to me and looked at me. How long have you known about us? She asked. I stared at her, but I didn't say anything. I don't want to have this conversation in front of everyone. Sensing I wouldn't tell her, she sighs. Okay, how long have you all known then? She asks as she stares at her father. The room is silent. All eyes are on my mate, but I know everyone wants me to open my mouth, but where do I start? Chapter 5. Lena. He had to sit in front of me. My insides were going crazy, and I didn't know whether I wanted to jump him or punch him. Bex admired him. He has gotten hotter, she said. I groaned. Don't start, I said to her. He's the one who sent me away and even hurt me. Bex looks at me. I know, but he's our mate, we can forgive him. I know I can forgive him, but something was niggling at me. Everyone here must have known. No one looked surprised when he said mate to me. Everyone just kept looking at me to see my reaction. Bex was sensing everything I was feeling. They must have had a good reason for keeping it from us, she says. I looked around and noticed that my father was staring at me. Everything was falling into place, the way my father and Logan were acting earlier. I was starving earlier, but now I had somehow lost my appetite. I glanced and looked straight into his dark brown eyes. They were full of fire and desire. Like hell, I said to Bex. I need time, I said to her. Bex looks at me and nods. She knows it took me a long time to get over what he did and said to me that day. He probably has forgotten what he did. Stop staring at me, I said to him. Take a picture or something. He looks at me, but a smirk appears on his face. I moved the chair back and got up. I stood there and glanced around, looking at each person. But my eyes landed back on his. How long have you known about us? I asked him. I was met with silence. His eyes were staring at me. He looked like he wanted to talk, but he never opened his mouth. I glanced around at everyone else. Okay, how long have you all known about us being mates? I asked them. No one said anything. Well, I said to them. My father clears his throat, and I look at him. Lena, please eat, he says as he looks at my plate. We can talk about this after food. I sigh. Nope, I say and I move away from the table. I'm going to my room, I'm not hungry anymore. I walked away and headed straight upstairs to my room. I slammed the door behind me. I glanced around. I know I seem childish, but I hate feeling like this. I never get treated like an adult or taken seriously, I always get treated like a child. You need to calm down, says Bex. I close my eyes and look at her. I'm trying, but I want answers. I'm not a kid anymore, that's why we never came back earlier. I knew this would happen, I said to her. Bex knows how I feel. I'm the youngest in this household. I wasn't planned, but my mother and father were happy to have another child. My mum always made me feel special and always did things with me. My father only bothered when my mother would make him or when we all did family night, which would be board games or even watching a film together. It was planned for once a week. But when she died, my father became this person who bubble wrapped me and made me feel so insecure about everything that I never knew who I was truly, but I figured out more about myself by living with my uncle. I remember writing in a diary which helped with my feelings. especially when it came to my mum's death. I always bore my soul out on it, even my feelings about Elias. I remember I was in school, and somehow, everyone knew about it. I thought Logan told everyone, but I never found out who opened their mouths or even knew how they found out. I paced my room, trying to calm down. I hadn't been long in my room when I smelled his scent from outside my door. I stopped and looked at my door. Without thinking, I walked over to the door and opened it. And there he was, with his fist out, ready to knock on the door. I stared up at him. He's tall. He stares down at me, his eyes searching mine. I frown. "What do you want, Elias?" I asked him. He stares at me and frowns. "Why do you still keep calling me that?" he asks and steps closer, but I move back. He's now in my doorway, and I can't even close my door. I stare at him. I know why I say it. He doesn't like his full name. Everyone in school and around the pack calls him Eli, and I never understood why. I know why I do it. It pisses him off still, like I used to call him Elias when I was a child. "Well, it's your name," I said to him. I wrap my arms around my waist as I can feel his eyes checking me out. I frowned once again. "Eyes up here," I said to him. His dark eyes land on my face, and he smirks. "I like what I see," he says. I look at him. What an ass. He checks me out. I would be flattered, but he needs to leave me alone. Bex is drooling and panting hard in my head. "He can have me in any way he wants," she says. Horny wolf. My head hurts. I need him to leave so I can think. I look at him as he stares at me. "You need to leave," I say as I step toward him. I close the gap between us, and his scent engulfs me. I can feel my core tighten as his scent and warmth hit me. I look up at him, and he smirks. He knows he is affecting me. "No, I want to talk to you," he says. I looked at him. "Bex, I need time, but I think we can tease him," I said to her, as I never took my eyes off him. Bex looks at me, and a mischievous smirk forms on her face. She knows what I want to do, and I think she might like it. I look back at him and place my hand on his chest. As soon as my hand goes to his chest, the tingles of the mate bond shoot through me like electricity. I didn't react and knew there wouldn't be any talking done the way my core is acting. I stay as calm as I can, not giving much away. "You need to leave now, Elias," I said to him. Elias leans down, places his head on my head, and breathes in my scent, but he comes at eye level with me. "Stop calling me that, little mate," he says. I look at him, pushing him slightly, which makes him stagger slightly. I got him out of my doorway. I leaned closer, my eyes staring into his. "What should I call you then, Elias?" I said with my hand still firmly on his chest. I can feel his heartbeat spike a bit. I looked at his lips and then back into his eyes. Elias licks his lips as he moves his top half toward me. "Call me mate," he says in a husky voice. I knew I had to up the game, but I just hoped I could manage this without him sensing how turned on I was. I move closer, which takes him by surprise. I move my hand to the top of his pants, and his breathing gets heavy. "I guess it will have to be Elias," I say, and I look at his lips and back to his eyes. I bite down on my bottom lip and move away quickly. I stepped back quickly and held my door. "Now leave," I said as I closed the door on him. I turned around and leaned on the door for support. I closed my eyes, and Bex stared back with an evil smirk. "You made him hard," she said. I stared at her, but I didn't say anything. I waited for a moment, but I heard his footsteps go after a few minutes. I walked away from my door and headed to the dressing table. I grabbed my phone and dialed my uncle's number. I press the call button, and he answers on the first ring. "Lena, everything okay?" he asks with a hint of worry. "Did you know?" I asked him. "Did you know that Elias was my mate?" My uncle was quiet, but after a few seconds, which seemed like ages, he said, "Yes, I knew." I sat on the chair and looked at my door. Everyone knew, including my uncle. "Lena, you need to hear," he says, but I hung upon him. My uncle was here when I was told to leave. He took me back to his pack. He's the beta to the alpha there. He was more loving than my father and even treated me like an equal. I never told anyone, only him, what Elias said and did to me. I got up and walked over to my bed. I place a block up on Bex as I don't feel like talking to anyone. I need to calm down and not overact about everything. Chapter 6. Eli. I couldn't help but stare at the door. I was shocked and also surprisingly turned on by the whole situation. I could hear Blaze laughing in my head when I looked back at him. He was grinning, but I could tell she had affected him too, as he had drool forming from his mouth due to the close contact with her. Her scent was overpowering my senses, but all I wanted was to pick her up and f*k her right up against the door. "You and me both," says Blaze with a howl. "She is one feisty mate." I couldn't help but agree with him. I never thought Lena was like this. She was always quiet and never got in trouble. The woman in the room was not a girl anymore. I adjusted my pants as my C*K was straining against the material. This is going to be hell. I stared at the door for a few seconds and tried to listen in, but I couldn't hear anything. I turned and walked down the stairs. I only came up here to talk to her and to try to tell her my side of the story. I never thought that she would act like that. As I got to the bottom of the stairs, everyone had moved into the lounge. I looked around, but I couldn't help but notice the smirk on Logan's face. He must have heard everything that went on upstairs. I walked over to the couch and sat down. The room was silent, which was making this whole situation uncomfortable. "I knew this was a bad idea," blurts Sophia, looking between all of us. I looked at her, and her eyes landed on Tim lastly. "You knew she would have been tired from the journey of getting here." Tim looked down, but Sophia wasn't done. "And you, Eli," she said as she turned to me. "You knew this could happen, and you did send her away. You didn't give her an explanation back then, so she might have a lot of resentment towards you." I groan. I never thought of it like that. I know what I said to her was horrible at the time, but I needed to concentrate on Blaze and me. Her scent was driving both of us crazy. "I know," I said. "I should have realized that things wouldn't be straightforward." There was more silence, but someone received a text message. Tim pulls out his phone and grunts. "Just great," he says as he looks up at us. "Keith knows," Lena asked him, and he couldn't lie to her. He told her he knew, but she hung up on him before he could say anything and wouldn't take his calls. "He will be here tomorrow evening to help with the situation." I stare at Tim and feel slightly envious of what he has with Keith. I wish I had a sibling, someone who would stand by me when I needed it. I know I have Logan, but I would get jealous whenever he mentioned Lena. He loved her and would do anything for her. But we were never in school at the same time as her, as she was younger than us. "I think having Uncle Keith here might make it easier," says Logan, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced over at him. He wrapped his arm around Sophia and leaned his head on her shoulder. "God, I wish I could do that with Lena soon." "I think you're right," says my father. "Keith looked after her when she left, and he might know how to approach her. I looked over at Tim, and he looked hurt at what my father said. I guess it's true, he would have been the one to approach her before all this. I feel guilt wash over me. I put all of my mate's family in an awkward position. Mate needed to go, says Blaze as he sits on his hind legs, staring at me. I would have had her bent over every item of the pack house. I shiver at the thought. Blaze was like a horny teenager with paws. It was hard when I was like that, but dealing with him and myself got too much to handle. I think we should let Lena rest and sleep, says Sophia as she looks at all of us. It's been a long day, and she needs time to calm down and even think about everything. I was about to protest, but Logan could tell that I wouldn't agree with his mate. Eli, you and Alpha leave, he says as he looks over to Tim. Both Sophia and I will stay here with my dad and Lena. She needs to calm down, and when she gets up, we can tell her our side of the story and hopefully make her see some sense about all this. I looked at him but didn't say anything. I want to stay here, and I need to be near Lena. But I know there is no way she'll talk, especially if I'm here. Come on, son, says my father. I nod, and we both say goodbye to everyone. Tim and my father talk for a few moments on the doorstep, but I leave without looking back at them. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked away. I know I need to get to my room and be away, but I also know I probably won't get much sleep due to not being around Lena. I get home without my father following me. He must have sensed that I needed to be on my own. I walked straight through the pack house and straight to my room without saying or acknowledging anyone. I walked in and closed the door behind me. I leaned on it and closed my eyes. There before me was an image of Lena. She looked stunning. I opened my eyes, but I know my C*K has again come to life. I walked straight over to the bathroom and switched on the shower. I got undressed and walked in. I needed to wash away the evening events. I showered quickly and walked back into my room with a towel wrapped around my waist. I quickly threw on a pair of grey sweats with no boxers and walked over to the bed. I lay on it and looked up at the ceiling. Blaze sent another image of Lena, making me instantly rock hard. After a few seconds, I climbed back into bed and stared at the ceiling. This is going to be a long night, I thought to myself. After reading and even watching a film, I eventually dropped off, but I woke up before the crack of dawn due to a dream I had of Lena. It was hot as hell, which led me to have another play with myself. I glanced at the clock and groaned out. It was 6 in the morning. I got out of bed and walked into the bathroom. I did what I needed to do and went to my closet to get some workout gear. I might as well go for a run, it might help clear my head. I headed out of my room and walked through the pack house, straight to the pack house door. Not many people were around this morning, as training usually starts at 9. I ran straight out of the pack house and into the forest, running for a good half hour before I realized where I was. I was standing right in front of Lena's house. I could hear something and looked towards the garage. I knew Logan had a few gym pieces of equipment there from back in the day. The sound sounded like someone was punching the punch bag he owned. I walked over and noticed the garage door was open wide. I stopped in my tracks as I stared at the sight in front of me. There in all her gym glory, very tight yoga pants, and sports, was Lena. She looks hotter in the gear she is wearing. I watch as she hits the bag. I know I should have left, but I couldn't. I needed to see her. After a few more punches, Lena stops and looks over her shoulder. She stares at me and frowns. Elias, she says. I hate it when she calls me that, but it makes me crazy. I didn't say anything but walked over to her. I couldn't help but smirk as she turned to face me. Chapter 7. Lena. Once I knew Elias was gone from the house, I could breathe better. I could feel Beck's move in my head as she tried to get the block down. I needed time to myself. I also needed to figure out why my family hid something like this from me. I heard a ping come from my phone, and I grabbed it. It was from my uncle letting me know that I should talk to Logan and my dad, and also he was going to be arriving at the pack tomorrow evening. Great, my uncle was the beta for his pack. He was my father's brother, and he was best friends with the alpha of his pack. He moved to the other pack for a woman who happened to be his chosen mate, but she passed away a year before my mum did. He was heartbroken, and it took him ages to get over her. I never believed in the chosen mate's situation. I thought if you didn't find your mate, you should live alone or move on, but never settle, as you may find your mate unexpectedly. I sigh and fall back on my bed. I couldn't help but stare at the ceiling, but I removed the block I had on Bex. I can see and feel her close by. You okay? She asks. I nodded, not saying anything. She stares at me and moves her head to the side. We stare at each other for a few moments before Bex breaks the stare. You need to talk to mate, she says. I frown at her. You do realize that our mate was the one who sent us away and hurt our feelings back 6 years ago, I say to her, the same mate who we caught another woman that same day too. Bex growls, he was young and stupid, she says. He obviously knew about us being his mate then, I said to her as I moved up from the bed. He still ked her not long after we left. Bex was quiet, but she stared at me. I knew she was thinking of ways to make the woman pay and our mate, judging by the look she was giving me. I know I'm no virgin, but at least I waited till I was over that before I went with someone. Elias knew how I felt about him back then, and still, he broke me in more ways than he should. I get up and grab the stuff that I need for a shower. Maybe if I wash away the feelings I have and get some sleep, I might be able to think about this rationally and listen to whatever everyone has to say. My mind wanders. I need to get some sleep before I get overtired and become more irritable than usual. I quickly get showered and ready for bed. Bex was pondering. She must have been planning a murder or something the way she was pacing in my head. I climbed into my bed, but I could hear movement outside my room. I knew it was my father as his scent wafted in. I stared at my door, wondering if he would come in here to talk to me, but I silently prayed that he would leave me alone. After a short few seconds, he moves away from the door. I couldn't help but sigh. I moved down the bed and placed my head on the pillow. I looked back at Bex, who was staring back at me. Whose murder are you planning? I asked jokingly. Bex smirks. I might plan mates if he says anything to hurt you, she says, but she sighs. Lena, I have your back and I know you still have feelings for him. But I also know he hurt you. I will go with your lead on this one. Thanks, Bex, I said. I need some time to think and even find out a few things first, but we will see how it goes. We both know he will end up being an A*S at some point. I smiled. Bex smirks, that's true, but Lena, she says as she licks her lips. He is one fine piece of ass. I groaned. Down girl, I said to her, making her laugh. I need to sleep, I said to her. I think we should go for a run or do some training in the morning. Bex nods and yawns. After saying good night, it wasn't long before I fell asleep. I woke up to the sun streaming in through the curtains. I groaned and got from bed. I rub my eyes and look around. My eyes landed on the clock. It read 6:30. I get out of bed and get dressed. I place my lycra leggings and sports bra on and walk out. I walked down the stairs to find no one there. I walked into the kitchen and noticed a note, and it was from my father, letting me know that he and Logan were on patrol and would be back soon. I scrunched up the note and threw it in the bin. I walk over to the fruit bowl and have some fruit for breakfast. Once I had finished, I moved toward the garage entrance. I might as well use the punch bag, and knowing that my father and brother would be home soon, there was no point in going for a run. I wanted to talk to them first before seeing or dealing with Elias. I walked through and opened the garage entrance wide to feel the fresh air while I was working out. I placed the boxing gloves on and started to hit the bag. I usually use sparring partners for this type of thing, but as there is no one here and not many people would believe it if I told them what I could do, they might even laugh at me. "No one will laugh at you," says Bex. I smile. "You can take on the best of the best in Keith's pack and even come out on top," she says, but a smirk appears on her mouth. I started my warm-up, but a scent came my way as I began to get into it. I know who's behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw Elias staring at me. I frown. "What do you want, Elias?" I asked him. I punched the bag a lot of times, but he never answered me. I turned to look at him but noticed that he was closer. He was staring at me with a stupid smirk on his face. Bex looks at him but frowns. "He looks like a fruitcake," she says, and I can't help but try to hide a laugh. I moved around and punched, but Elias grabbed the bag. "What the actual hell?" I glared at him. "Get off the bag, Elias," I said to him. Elias looks me over, but I can feel his eyes move over my body, but they come up to my eyes. "Stop calling me that," he says. I smirk. "Nope," I say and start to hit the bag again. I punch lightly as I don't want to show too much strength. I could feel Elias's gaze on me as he held the bag. "You know I could show you a few moves," he says. "No, thank you, Elias, I can manage," I said to him, punching the bag again. He looks at me, but I know he is checking me out again. Seriously, I will punch him in the face if he carries on. I only need him to say one stupid thing, and I will. I kept punching, but Elias wasn't taking the hint. "I think I should show you some moves," he says. "You know women always need help to fight, they either want the bloke to fight for them, or they don't want to do it just in case they break their nail or something." Oh no, he didn't. I can feel anger building up inside me. Bex was up on all fours, letting a low growl slip through her mouth. I'm beyond pissed, and he's one stupid dumbass. A thought comes into my head which makes Bex and I smirk. I punched the bag once, but I aimed straight toward his face for the second punch. I put all my swing into it. As my fist connects with his face, Elias moves back with a stumble, and his hand goes to his face. He looks at me, slightly shocked. I glared back at him. "Leave me alone," I yelled at him and turned to walk away. I walk towards the house and head in, but I notice two figures outside of the corner of my eye. My father and brother. I didn't give AFK what they witnessed, Elias deserved it. Bex was pissed at him, she was all for girl power. No one should assume anything about a woman, especially when they haven't seen each other for a long time. I walked back inside and slammed the door behind me. I could feel eyes on me the entire time, but I didn't care. "Jackass mate," I muttered under my breath. Chapter 8. Eli. I couldn't help but stare at Lena as she left. My face was hurting from where she punched me, and I will be honest, that punch knocked me off my feet. Where did she learn to punch like that? "You dumbass," says Blaze, trying not to laugh. "What did I do?" I was pulled away from my thoughts when I heard footsteps coming toward me, and I turned around to be confronted by Tim and a smirking Logan. I groan. Tim looks toward the house. What happened? He asks, never taking his eyes from the door that Lena went through. I sigh. I don't know, I say. Tim doesn't say anything or even look my way. He walks back towards the house and heads inside. I stared at the door. You, Logan said as I turned around to look at him. You had to open that macho mouth of yours and think that Lena needs help, he says. I grunted. I thought I would lend my expertise, I said to him. Logan's smirk was still plastered on his face, and he glanced at the door. You know, my dad and I didn't talk to her this morning as we were called to patrol early due to rogues, he says as he looks back at me. I stared back at him and frowned. That might explain why she didn't want me to be around then, I said. Logan smirks. Yeah, that's why, he says. I have to admit that was a mean right hook she gave you. You have a bruise forming. I grunted. It was a lucky shot, I say to him. Logan chuckles. Whatever, he says. After a few seconds, Logan calms down and stares at me. He sighs. My dad and I will talk to her now, but I think you should leave for a while, he says. I will let you know how it goes. I nod but don't say anything. I wasn't happy about it, and neither was Blaze, but we should go back and do some work. I was about to turn to leave when Logan stopped me. Oh, my dad heard from Uncle Keith. He's on his way here. You might have a visit from him when he arrives, he says. Okay, I will keep an eye out for him, I said. We both nodded and went our separate ways. I walked towards the pack house. There were a few people around as it was time for training. I guess I had best get to training. I needed to work out some frustration. I headed over to the training grounds. Bruce, the warrior trainer, was waiting for me as I got closer. He looks up at me and frowns. Where did you get the shiner? He asks as his lips curl up slightly. I told you to duck when a fist comes towards you. I grunted. I was taken by surprise, that's all, I said to him. I can hear Blaze laugh in my head. Good explanation. Do you want to tell him it was by your mate too? He says with a smirk. I ignore him. I scanned the grounds, and all the pack members were there. Some were already sparring, and others were waiting for instructions. You know she is back, right? Says a voice from the side of me. I turned to look at her. Naomi. I smirked. I know, I've already seen her, I said. Naomi stares at me, but her eyes are glued to my face. She starts to smirk. I guess someone wasn't to happen to see you, she says as she places her hand on my cheek. She presses down, and the pain from the punch hits my eye. I moved back and frowned at her. Hey, watch it, I said to her. I could hear a growl from behind me. Mate, you best get in line for training, or I will punish you for not listening to me, said Bruce. Naomi looks at him with raised eyebrows. I will, baby. I just wanted to know if Alpha Eli knows a certain person is back in the pack, she says. She walked around me and straight up to him. She pulls him down by placing her hand on his face and placing a kiss on his lips. I had to look away as it would be weird to carry on looking, especially as Naomi was my ex. I'm going to train for a bit, I said, even though I didn't know if they were paying attention. I get in line with a few other high-ranked pack members, and we start to train. Naomi was a girlfriend from back in the day when we were in high school. We both knew we had mates, and we agreed to stop when we found out about our mates. The only problem was that I had learned about mine for years, and Naomi only found her mate 2 years ago. Let's just say she wasn't too happy when I told her. Bruce came to the pack to help with training, and he was from our neighboring pack, the Crescent Moon pack. The neighboring pack's run by a dear friend of mine, Alpha Dean. Alpha Dean and I are friends. Our fathers would bring us to the Alpha meetings every year. We used to train with a high-ranking trainer wherever we were staying. I was pulled from my thoughts when Bruce decided to put us into groups to fight. I fought hard as usual, but my mind went to Lena as always. The image of her in the lycra leggings as she moved was something I would love to witness again. Training went on for another hour. Everyone dispersed and headed back to the pack house, as many members had jobs on the pack grounds. I walked away but noticed Bruce and Naomi walking hand in hand towards their home. I wish I could be like that with Lena. I walked straight into the pack house and headed straight to the office. As I walked in, my father glanced up and smirked, "Like the Shiner," he said, "a nice present from Lena." I groan, "Who told you?" I ask, but I have a funny feeling about who might have. My father smirks and taps his nose. He doesn't say anything but stares at me. "I'm going to shower and then get to work," I said. My father nods and carries on with whatever he is doing. I walk straight to the bathroom. I have a shower room built into my office as I never have time to grab a shower, usually after training. I had it made in when I took over as Alpha, and I typically stay late here, which means I never get a chance to freshen up when I want to. I quickly shower and get dressed. About a half hour later, I sat at my desk as my father left the room only briefly. He was going to do some training himself and to have some food. I worked on the documents that I needed to complete. It must have been a few hours that went by when there was a knock at my door. "Come on," I shouted as I placed the last paperwork into the folder. The door opens and in walks Keith. I smile at him as he closes the door behind him. "Alpha Eli, it's so good to see you once again," he says. I nodded. "Yeah, it is nice to see you too," I said to watch him take a seat. Once Keith was settled, he looked at me. "Do I want to know who did that, or should I guess?" he asked, pointing under his eye. I groan. I seriously need this bruise to heal. I can feel Blaze smirk, but he doesn't say anything. "Don't ask," I said to him. Keith nods, but he has a hint of a smirk appearing on his face. "She has changed," I tell Tim and Logan not to mess with her. "But I guess everything needs to come out now," he says. I nodded but didn't say anything. Keith looks at me and carries on. I tried to ring Lena back, but she never answered. I asked my Alpha if I could stay for a while until she had settled. "Is that good for you?" "Yeah, having you here might help more," I said, agreeing with him. Lena had been with his pack for 6 years, and he would have an insight into her. Besides, Lena hasn't exactly opened up about anything. I know it has only been 1 day, but I want to know more about her. I looked at Keith, and he was staring at me. "I won't overthink about the punch," he says and moves out of the chair. "I know you want to know her, but there is one thing you all need to realize." He stops and looks down at me. "Lena hasn't had it easy, and I mean, not what you see is what you get with her. She had to work hard to get to where she is now, and she won't let anyone stop her." I smiled. "I just want to know my mate, I want to know everything about her, but until you all talk to her, I can't. I need to tell her my side of the story too," I said to him. He nods but looks at me. "I have to ask, and you can tell me to keep out of your business, but have you been with any other woman?" he asks. I raised my eyebrows at him. "Keith, that's personal, but I will tell you, I haven't been with anyone in 2 years, I said to him. Keith sighs. "I didn't mean anything by it, Eli, he says and looks toward the office door. Lena was hurting when she left here, I mean, she wanted nothing to do with you. I couldn't even mention your name in front of her for a while, but she worked through it, and I have to say she made something of herself over in the pack. Many pack members look up to her. He turns to me, I would give her some time to adjust to being back. There are some things you don't know, and I think you should wait till Lena is okay with telling you. I stared at him, feeling slightly confused. Keith looks at me and smiles. I can't tell you anything as it's not my story to tell, but you need to be prepared for whatever she has to tell you. Some of it might explain some things that went on around here. I was about to say something, but a mind link came through. It was Logan. Hey man, Uncle Keith with you? He asks. Yeah, he's here, I tell him. Okay, well, we talked to Lena, and she knows our version. But I have to tell you, you might want to hold out talking to her for a little while so she can process everything. She just had an overload of information, he says. I mentioned we all train in the mornings, and if she wanted to come, she could, but she said she might give it a miss tomorrow as she has some things to do in her room, but she will be there the following day. I smile. Okay, that's fair enough, I say. I close the mind link down and see Keith staring at me with an odd expression, and he shakes his head and smiles. I just had a mind link off my brother to go there, he says. I nod. Keith turns and leaves the office. I follow his every move as he closes the door behind him, and I can't help but lean back in my chair. What did he mean by all that about Lena? I could feel Blaze come forward slightly, and I knew he was listening in on everything being said. He might be on about how you last spoke to Mate when she was here, he said. I can't help but grimace at what he said. I was an A*S back then. I was attracted to her, and I couldn't do a thing about it. And being a moody teenager, I wanted what I couldn't have. Knowing that I couldn't have her was hard, but I had to wait till she was the right age. Blaze was as horny and hormonal as I was. He was making all my hormones heightened, especially when her scent wafted near us. I had to be a jerk, and I had to be the bad guy. Blaze stares at me, you were dumbass. I frown. I know, and I agree, but we now have to figure out how to make everything right with our mate, I said. Blaze nods and looks deep in thought. We should let Mate think about things first, but we could send her a gift, he says. That sounds like a good idea. We could send her a bone, he says, wagging his tail. I smirked. Maybe next time, I said to him, even though her wolf would like that. I leaned forward and grabbed the phone. I knew what I wanted. I just hope she will like them. Chapter 9. Lena, of all the absurd things to say to me, I needed to be shown just in case I broke a nail. What an ass. I walked into the kitchen and flipped on the kettle. I was fuming over what Elias had said to me. It might sound harsh and childish of me to be like this, but I have my reasons for being like that. I was a geek through school, as many people would call me. I loved reading and doing my own thing, which meant I had no friends. I was alone, but everyone had something to say about me. I was either weak, a freak, or just stupid. Many of the girls in my school would pretend to be friends with me just to get close to Elias and Logan. Some would even go as far as coming over for a sleepover and staying. I often found them kissing my brother or Elias, leaving me out of it. When we were back at school, they all went back to ignoring me or tormenting me. It only happened once, as I was too scared to have anyone else over again. My father never questioned anything, he thought everything was fine. I made sure he didn't know about any of it, as he would have made it worse for me. Elias and Logan were popular back in their day, but they were still popular when I was in school. They all wondered why I was never like Logan. Boys would call me ugly while girls would call me pathetic. They all thought I should be like Logan. I always wrote diaries about what I went through but never told anyone. I found them all in the back of my closet when I was sorting out my room. I didn't want to get rid of them as I wanted to remember the person I was here. I was never naive, but I was a girl who lived in a house full of men. I never had a girly bone in my body, and everyone made fun of it. The only person I had throughout high school was Bex. She never took control or made me feel like everyone else did. She was the only friend I had back then, and she helped me as much as she could. She would console me when I would cry myself to sleep or even just badmouth everyone who hurt my feelings. Bex was my lifeline and has always made sure I knew she had my back. When I went to my Uncle Keith's pack, I was an outsider but focused on what I wanted to do. I never wanted to be alone, and I wanted friends. After I completed basic training, I made some friends. I felt a whole other feeling of being wanted, and it wasn't because of my brother and his best friend. The kettle came to a boil, and I was pulled out of my thoughts. But I soon realized that I wasn't alone in the kitchen anymore. I don't look behind me, but I know who it is. "Do you want a cuppa?" I asked as I made myself one. "Yes, please," says my father. I could hear a chair being pulled back along the floor. I quickly made 2 cups of tea. Once I get to the table, I place the mugs down and pull the chair next to my father. I sat down and placed my mug in my hands. I could feel my father's eyes on me. "Did it feel good to punch Eli?" he asks. I looked up at him but noticed the smirk on his face. I smirked. "Yeah, it did," I said to him. My father nods. "I have to admit, he went back with that mean hook you threw," he says as he picks up his mug and takes a sip of his tea. I watched him. "Are you going to tell me how long you have all known that Elias has been my mate?" I asked him. My father gulps the tea back and places the mug on the table. He quickly looks at me. "Straight to the point, hey," he says. I nod as I heard the front door open. I knew it was Logan. I sip my tea as he walks into the kitchen. He looks between my father and me. "We will tell you," he says, "but I'm going to make a cuppa." Logan pours a cuppa and heads over to the table to sit next to me. He sips some and places it in front of him. He looks at me but smirks. Have to say that punch was awesome to witness. There is even a bruise forming under his eye. I could feel Beck's smirk as she sat on her hind legs. She was waiting patiently to hear their explanation. I stared at him. "Thanks, but can we talk about the fact that you both knew Elias was my mate?" I said to him. Logan looks at me but glances at my father. "Lena, you have to understand, we found out Eli was acting strangely when he would come here," says my father. "I mean, he would stand outside your door if he stayed over, or he looked like he was going to pounce on you when you came anywhere near him." I grimaced and frowned. "What are you talking about? Elias never saw me as anything but as a little sister. When he sent me away, he made that clear," I said to them. Logan shook his head. "No, Lena, you do not understand," he says and sighs. "Eli found out that you were his mate when you were 13 years old." I stared at him, slightly shocked at what he said. 13, I was 13. That's strange and also illegal. "But how?" I asked him, with a frown forming on my face. Logan leans back in the chair. "Eli told me he found out that you were his mate a few months after you left," he said. But he looks at my father. "Dad found out before I did." I turned to look at my father. My father gave me a small smile. I wanted to tell you, Lena, I did. But it is against werewolf law to announce to anyone who is just the age of consent to announce to the minor that they are mates. They have to wait for their mate to be of age, he says. I stare at him, but that makes some sense, I guess. So, why couldn't you both tell me? I asked them. My father moves his hand and removes mine from his, and he holds my hand. Lena, Alpha Frank told us not to as he wanted you to have no prior knowledge of who your mate is, and also it would be against the law for us too, he said. Bex looks through my eyes and comes closer, coming up front with me. Her warmth takes over me as she sits with me in my human form. My father looks at me, and his eyes widen slightly as he notices Bex. Bex, he said quietly. We nodded at him. We understand why now, but made her human, she says. My father squeezes my hand slightly. I know, but you have to understand Eli was trying to do what was best for you and him at the time. We don't know exactly what he was thinking about at the time, as that's his story to tell you, but I know he was having a hard time, especially with his wolf, as he was acting more like a hormonal teenager than Eli was, he says. Bex nods but goes back slightly. She wanted to let them both know that she was there, listening to everything they said. Don't I know it, says Logan out of nowhere. I looked over at him. Logan looks at me with a frown. Blaze was hard work, and he would even take over Eli to try and find you, he says. Never go between Blaze and what he wants, trust me. I raised my eyebrows at him. What do you mean? Logan stares at me. Blaze would fight and even injure people if they wouldn't let him find you. He wasn't even willing to let you go for Eli's sake, he says. Alpha Frank even had to interfere a few times, even put him in his place. But Blaze was a strong-willed alpha wolf, and no one could do anything. But Eli had to tell him to let you go, or he would be sent to jail. I looked away from him and stared ahead. Everything makes sense now. My father and Logan had to keep it from me. I guess Blaze would have made them tell him where I was if he had his way. But knowing that if they did tell me, I assume they would also be sent to jail. I sighed. I get it, but I felt like I had no option in the matter, I said. I looked at my father, then at Logan. Do you know what it was like to be sent away by someone who stayed here all the time and made me feel like I was the ugliest and something he trod in? Logan looked at me with a small smile. I know, Eli told me what he said to you, and I did have a massive go at him, but I knew he had to do it. I look away, I know that, but it hurt. I didn't want to leave, even with all the bullying I was going through in school. I never wanted to leave my father and Logan, they were my family. Why couldn't you both come with me? I asked them as I looked at my hand. I was on my own, and I only had Uncle Keith. No one else. The silence that followed that question was deafening. I wish we could, but Alpha Frank thought we would slip up or something, said my father, who gently squeezed my hand. I didn't look at him. I can't go. Eli's my best friend, and I would be his beta, said Logan. I turned and stared at him. Oh, so Elias is someone more important than your little sister, I said to him. I could feel Bex coming close, but not to the surface. Lena, don't be like that, he says and looks at me. There was sadness in his eyes. I could never choose between you and Eli, and I had to be here. Like Dad said, Alpha Frank thought we would tell you, and you know I would never lie to you, Lena. I closed my eyes. This was information overload. Lena, you okay? Asked Bex as she looked at me with concern. I'm okay, I just need to process all this, I said to her. I opened my eyes and sighed. I think I'm going to go to my room, I need to process this, I said. I pushed back on my chair and pulled my hand from my father's hand. I got up and headed to my room. I know that what they said would be accurate, but Alpha Frank should never have questioned their loyalty to him, and I know I would have asked them to tell me. With everything I went through, I probably would have told them not to mention Elias's name. But for them not to come to see me for 6 years, only FaceTime was hard. They never said or even let on about anything on the phone. I was outside my room and opened my door. I walked in and closed the door behind me. I sat on the bed. I couldn't help but glance around the room. I got out of bed and headed to my closet. I bent down and grabbed the box full of old diaries. I placed them on the bed and sat next to the box. I made sure I was comfy. I pulled one out and began to read. I didn't want to remember the bad experience I had, but they were a reminder of who I was. I am still the same person, but I was a girl who lost her mother and was all alone in the world back then. Now I know I have changed, and many people will be shocked to see what I can do. Chapter 10. Lena. I must have been sitting in my room for over 2 hours before someone knocked on my door. I placed the diary I was reading back into the box and shouted, "Come in." The door opens, and I look up to see Sophia walking in. I smiled at her. "Hey," she says, "how are you doing?" I sighed. I watched her walk in and close the door behind her. "I'm okay, just trying to process everything they told me," I said. I move the box closer to me and tap the bed for her to sit. Sophia moves and sits on the bed. She pulls her legs up onto the bed and crosses them over. "I bet it was a lot to take in," she said. I looked at her. "When did you find out?" I asked her. I did not doubt that Logan had told her. Sophia looks at me and smiles. "I only found out a few months ago when Logan told me that you were coming back. I was a little like you, but also, I could understand where Eli was coming from." I nodded. "I know where Elias was coming from, but I had to live without my father and brother for 6 years, I said. I know I was meant to come back earlier, but I was still getting over what Elias said to me. It was hard, and healing from the words took a long time. But I started to plan for my future and even got to travel for a year." "That sounds amazing. Where did you go?" Sophia asked. I couldn't help but smile. I loved talking about the places I went to. "I went to France, Italy, Spain, and even Cuba," I said. Sophia's eyebrows shot up. "You went to loads of exotic places, how?" she asked. I smirked. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I said to her. "I know I have proof of everything, but it is all back in my uncle's pack." Sophia looked at me. "I would believe you, Lena. I have heard so much about you from Logan that I think I could be part of the family," she says. I leaned forward and grabbed hold of her hand. "Sophia, you are family," I said to her and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Sophia smiled. "Thanks, I was worried you wouldn't like me," she said. I moved back and frowned. "Why would you think that?" I asked. "Well, I have no friends here as everyone knows everyone, they have their own cliques, and it is hard to make friends with people who like to judge someone on their past," she says with a sigh. "Oh, don't I know what these arseholes are like in this pack?" I looked at her. "Oh, I know what people are like here in the pack," I said. "No one knows that more than me." I glanced at Sophia. "And as for me liking you or not," I said to her. "I do, I think you are cool, and we are friends and family." Sophia smiles and gently squeezes my hand. "Thank you, that means so much." I nodded and smiled at her. Sophia glanced around the room, but her eyes landed on the box next to me. "What's in there?" she asks. I glanced at the box and frowned. "These are my old diaries from when I was in school, I read some of them. I was trying to figure out when everything changed." Sophia nodded. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I can honestly say I didn't know if I did. "Well, most of these were when things were rough for me in school," I said to her. "I never talk about it as no one knows, especially my dad, Logan, and Elias," I said to her. "But I was wondering, maybe you would like to read them. I don't trust many people, and I don't have any girlfriends." "Hey," says Bex in my head. "Besides Bex, my wolf," I said. "Better now," I said to her. Bex nods. She looked through my eyes and was reading the diaries with me. She kept growling and remembering everything that was done to me. Sophia looks at me. "I take it your wolf is the only one that you get to talk to about what happened," she says with a sad smile. I nodded. "Bex is the best, and she has been there for me since I was 10, I said. Sophia's eyes went wide. 10, you shifted early," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, I witnessed my mother's death at the hands of rogues," I said to her. I looked at the diary that was in my hand. "Bex shifted and guarded my mother's body till my father turned up," I said, not looking at her. "Logan doesn't know though, he was with Elias at the time." I looked up at her. "I won't tell him," she said. "You can tell that story when you're ready." I gave her a small smile. "Thanks," I said. I glanced down at the diary in my hand, but Sophia speaks. "I have to ask, why do you call Eli by his full name?" she asks. I looked up at her and smirked. "I know it pisses him off, and I never called him anything else," I said to her. Sophia smirks. "I bet it pisses him off when you call him that," she says. I nod. Sophia smiles, but she glances at the diary in my hand. "What is that about?" she asks as she nods her head toward the diary. I look down at it. "This one is the only one I took with me when I went to my uncle's pack," I said. I could feel tears prick in the back of my eyes. My mum was the one who thought I should write everything down, from my day to how I was feeling. I look at her, and Sophia looks at me with a sense of sadness on her face. "This one is the only diary that gives me hope and happy times, as it was all about the last year my mother was with us." Sophia nodded. "I bet there are a lot of memories in that one," she said. I nod. "There are a few cracking stories about Logan and my father. But my mother's words and her memories of the day were something I always put in my diary," I said to her. I handed the diary to her. "Would you like to read it?" I asked her. She looks at the diary and then back to me. "I would be honored to," she says as she takes the diary. I smile. Sophia places the book in her lap and looks at me. "I think we will have to go down as soon as the boys are ordering pizza, and your Uncle Keith will be here soon," she says. I nod. "Sophia," I said, "can you not mention the diaries to anyone?" I asked her. She looks at me. "I won't," she says, "they are yours to share, nothing to do with me but Lena. I will read them when you are ready to let me." I looked at her. "I would love that," I said. Sophia and I changed the subject from Elias and my diaries to learn more about each other. I have to admit, I love her already and even think she would make the best sister in the world. "I agree too," says Bex. Bex never likes many people, but she has taken to Sophia really well and even came forward to introduce herself to her. After an hour, there was a knock at the door, and it opened to my brother Logan. "I guess girly Chet can wait," he says as he looks at me, then at Sophia. "Uncle Keith is here," and so is the pizza, he says. Sophia nods and smiles at him. Yeah, sure, we will be down shortly, she says to him. Logan nods but glances at me. We okay, Minnie? He asks. I nod. Yeah, we are, but I would be better if you stopped calling me that, I said to him. Logan grins. Well, after the punch you gave Eli, I will consider it, he says. I smirk. Logan leaves. Both Sophia and I get off the bed, but Sophia turns around and smiles at me. I know we're friends and even family, but Lena, I want you to know I have your back, she says. Us girls have to stick together. I smile. Thanks, that means a lot, I said. Sophia turns and heads out of the door. I glanced around and noticed the diary I gave Sophia was on the bed. I finally have a girl I can class as a friend and family. I leave my bedroom door and close it behind me. I had best get this over with. I wonder what Uncle Keith's version of this is. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.